Hi there, students. Draught. Draught is both a verb and a noun. But notice there are two different spellings. D-R-A-F-T, which is American, and D-R-A-U-G-H-T, which is British, but for some of the meanings. So in British English, some meanings are D-R-A-F-T and some meanings are D-R-A-U-G-H-T. So I would suggest to you the easy way to do this is just spell everything with an F. But if you want to sound British, then you're going to have to learn the ones that are spelt with a G. And there's a huge range of meanings for this word. Okay, firstly, a draft, a current of air in a room or in a vehicle. A draft excluder is like a snake or a long sausage that you put at the bottom of the door to keep the drafts out. This room is very drafty. This house needs thick curtains as it's a very drafty house. I was sitting in a draft and I got a crick in my neck. Okay, so a current of air, particularly a cold one. And in British English, this is with a G. Okay, a draft, the act of drinking, a swig. He took a draught of his beer. Okay, a drink of his beer. So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase draft beer. Beer from the barrel, beer from the cask, not from a bottle. This pub has pale ale on draft. Also, a draft with the same type of meaning, a dose of medicine, a quantity of liquid. Okay, so a draft. And for me in British English, this is with a G. Yeah, draft beer. The Americans sometimes use the G spelling for this word as well. I think to give their beer a European feeling. Something more sophisticated, and therefore you can charge more. But they very often use F as well. Okay, a draft, an early preliminary version of something. The draft of a book, the draft of an email, a draft plan, a draft letter, a draft sketch. You have a draftsman who draws things. Okay, this is just a draft version. It's not the final version. I'm sure you've probably seen this draft in internet. Maybe you're writing an email and there's a little thing that says draft. So you haven't saved it yet maybe, or you haven't sent it yet. Just a draft version, a preliminary version. And this one, for me as a Brit, is an F, draft. A draft version, a preliminary version. Okay, the fourth definition. An animal that pulls loads. A work animal. So, for example, a draft horse. This is a great big horse that pulls a cart. The draft horses were pulling a dray. A dray is a cart, normally that has barrels of beer on it. So the draft horse drawing a dray of draft. There you go. This word draft here, a draft horse, is related to the word to draw, to pull. Would you draw the curtains? Pull the curtains. So a draft animal, a draft oxen to pull the plough. It's an animal that pulls. And this, for me, is a Brit with a G. Draught, very definitely. Okay, the next one, to conscript into the army. This is very American. During the Vietnam War, a draft dodger was a person who avoided being drafted into the army. They avoided the draft. Yeah, he was drafted into the army, but as a Brit, I would probably use the word conscripted. Okay, so to draft into the army. Also, in a similar way, the draft is a system of assigning new players to professional sports teams, especially in American football. He was the third draft pick. This is where the university American football players become professionals, and they're picked by the professional teams to play pro ball. So to draft, to conscript into the army, or to assign to a team. For me, as a Brit, this is definitely an F. Yeah, an F word, because also it's very American. Okay, the next meaning is the depth of water needed to float a ship or a boat. Whatever floats your boat, whatever turns you on, whatever you like. But the draft of water, the depth of water needed to make a ship float. This ship has too big a draft to go through the Panama Canal. Its depth in the water, the depth it sinks to in the water, is too deep. That is the draft. Yeah, it draws too much water. So the draft, the depth that a boat floats in the water. And for me as a Brit, this is definitely a G as well. Okay, so the draft, the depth of water. Now the next one's a bit old-fashioned. Yeah, a cheque or a money order written for a bank to tell them to pay. Yeah, a draft, a bank draft. It's how you draw money, perhaps. But nowadays people don't really use cheques. And for me as a Brit, this is definitely an F. Okay, so a draft, a money order, an order for a bank to tell them to pay. And finally, we have the game, drafts. It's what the Americans call checkers. You have white and black pieces, and the idea is to jump over the pieces of your opponent and to take all of his pieces. The game of drafts, the game of checkers. So a draft would be just one playing piece. Okay, and for me as a Brit, this is definitely a G. Okay, so let me go through the origin, and then maybe we'll go through the meanings again and look at the formality. So this word draft, in Old English, there's a word dragan, to drag, to pull. And this comes from the Proto-Germanic word dragana, to draw or to pull. Yeah, so it's got this idea of to pull. So now let's look at the formality, because I think the formality changes depending on the meaning. Doesn't that make life easy? So with a G, a current of air in a room. This is 5 in formality. You could use this informally and very formally. This room is very drafty. Don't sit in a draft, it's bad for you. Then we have the act of drinking with a G. He took a draught of his beer. I think this sounds literary, old-fashioned, a bit formal, maybe 6.5. I think informally I'd use the word a swig. He took a swig of his beer. That's for your informal conversation. Yeah? Or draft ale. Beer on draft. That is probably only 5 in formality, and you can use that anywhere. Beer on draft, neutral formality. Okay, a preliminary version of something, of a book, of an email. This is with an F. This is completely neutral. A draft version, 5 in formality, informal and formal. Yeah? So, a draft of the book was finished, and then the publisher read it. Okay, your draft animal to pull a load, with a G. I think this sounds quite formal and a bit old-fashioned and literary. Yeah, a draft animal, a draft horse. I might say a work horse or a pack horse or something like that. Probably 6.5 in formality. Draft oxen, oxen to work. Okay, to conscript into the army or to assign to a team with an F. 5 in formality, informal use and formal use. Nice and easy. The depth of water to float your boat with a G. The draft that this boat has a draft of. I'm going to give it 6.5. In formality, it sounds a little bit literary. I mean, I would probably use the word the depth of water that the boat takes up or the boat uses. Okay, a draft, a bank draft, a cheque or a paper for the bank to tell them to pay. I'm probably going to give this 6.5, 7 in formality, this word with an F. Yeah? And then finally the game drafts with a G, 5 in formality. You can use anywhere, you can use informally and formally. Notice to draft is a regular verb. He drafted the soldiers or the men. The men were drafted. Okay, so a regular verb as well. So, draft. A current of air. This house is draughty. The act of drinking. He took a draught of his beer. A draught of medicine. A preliminary version. A first run. A draft email. A draft plan. An animal that pulls a load. A beast of burden. A draft horse with a G. To conscript into the army with an F. To join the army or to assign to a team. The depth of water to float your boat with a G. The draft of this boat is too big for this canal. A bank draft. A cheque or a money order with an F. And then the game of drafts with a G. So there you go. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.